Welcome to the ultimate guide for mastering Spring Boot and Keycloak. Are you ready to evaluate your skills and secure your applications with powerful user management and authentication features? This is a comprehensive tutorial. We will dive into essential topics like creating users, managing user roles, organizing user groups, implementing forgot password functionality, sending verification emails, setting up role-based access control, running Docker Composer and creating rooms, and testing API using Postman. Whether you are a beginner or an experienced developer, this tutorial will provide you with the knowledge and tools to secure your applications effectively. Salut coders, this is Bisk here. Welcome back to another tutorial. Warm greetings to those who are joining us for the first time. If you are new to this channel, may you kindly subscribe, click the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever you upload new videos. In this tutorial, this is a complete tutorial different from all tutorials of Keycloak and Spring Boot integration. We are going to cover all the concept of Spring security and Keycloak integration. We are test our APIs using Postman, using the Java SDK client for Keycloak. So let's get started by creating a user, sending verification email, implement forgot password, assigning roles to users, assigning users to groups, all of those sort of things. We are going to do it in this tutorial. Configuring email SMTP, RBAC, role-based access control, how to whitelist URLs which are secure. Let's get started. So if you visit to my GitLab, you can see there's code in code with Bisky group. I have DevOps script where I added Keycloak Docker Composer YAML. So if you go to this in this folder, you can see if you go to Docker Composer YAML, I have Postgres and I have MySQL. So if you love Postgres, you can use this Docker Composer YAML, and it has an image for Postgres, and for MySQL, it has an image for MySQL database. Let's check here. I'm using MySQL version 8, so you can change the tag to latest to work fine. And these are the configurations for Keycloak. So for the Keycloak, we are going to use the latest version, which is 25.0.0. Let's go to the Keycloak Maven and see. So if you go to the Keycloak Maven, this is the core library. Right now it's on 25.0.1, so we can update it to the version that you want, but mine is 25.0.0. still it's fine. We are using almost the latest version, or you can update. So to log in into our Keycloak, the username is going to be admin and the password is going to be admin81234. You can also change, but I'm going to use the Postgres file because I love Postgres than MySQL. So if I go to my Postgres, the configuration are the same, and it's going to run on port 9082. If you are not familiar with the Docker Composer, just know this is the port that the application is going to run, and this is the one that is going to map to our Keycloak, and our Keycloak will be on port 8080. So I have already cloned the project. This is my project. So before I try to run it, make sure you have Docker installed. If you don't have Docker, just go to Docker installation page and you read how to install this with Docker. If you are using Mac, you are using Windows, or you are using Linux, you can install this. Look for based on your operating system, you can choose one here. So for me, I'm using Mac here. I already installed Docker, but let me start it. Okay, my Docker is now starting. I can just run in the command like docker ps in my terminal. If your Docker is installed correctly, it will be running. So this is for MySQL, the version that I'm currently using, but I don't want to use this one because this one is pointed to 9081. I want to use this is for Postgres, which is 9082. So let me clear this. and I will just say in my Keycloak, let me go into this folder, which is cd docker compose. Then I will say docker compose -f Postgres, and I'll just say up -t. I want it to run in background, that's why I say up -t. Before we run it in background, let's test it in foreground where we are seeing the errors. Maybe there's we are going to have an error. So let's just check if everything is okay in foreground. So right now it's now installing the database for the first time. Now it's running. So it's running fine in foreground, so we can change it later to run in background. So let me close this, and I'll just say localhost 9082. So this is our localhost, and we can see if you try to log in, we can log in into this, and based on our RIM, we don't have anything. So this is our Keycloak page for the first time after we run our Docker Compose YAML. So what we need to do next, let me stop this. I want you to run it in the background. And I will just add -d here. It will just run and stop. So even if I close this IntelliJ, the application will remain up. So that's why we want to run it in the background, because even here on production, your Docker is supposed to run in background always. So that's why we say -t. So it means our application is running, and our username to log into our console is admin, and this is the password, and we are connecting to Postgres database, and the schema of our Postgres is public, and the database username is Keycloak, and the password is password, and this is our URL to our Postgres, and we are running on localhost. These features are for token exchange. We can do that later in our video, in this video tutorial, maybe at the end of this video. So when we're running our Postgres, we just say we need the latest Postgres version, and this is where we are storing our data. You can see this is our data, where if you stop the application or shut down your computer, when you come back, your data is persisted, means your user must be stored in your database permanently with this Docker. So it's going to be stored here, and it's mapping to PG data. So this is the location where it is storing in the image, and this is on our local, and this is our DB, and this is our Postgres user, our Postgres username and password. So these are the credentials that we added here. We are done with the Keycloak running, so we need to get started. So if we go to our Keycloak, let me reload because I just restarted the Postgres, the Keycloak, so I need to reload it again. So here, this is a master room. So we use this master room, but for me, I prefer to create our separate room. So to create a room, everything started from a room. So your endpoints supposed to have a room which you are referring to. So here I will create a new room, and this room I will call it Spring, and the room is enabled. I will create this. The room has been created. Once the room is created, that's where we put everything like users, like roles, the mappings, Google sign in, email templates. You are now configuring best for room. So here, if you want to create a new user, you just come here and you create a user here. So email verified, I can say this one to true. And for the email, I'll just say test@gmail.com. So this is the email that I'm going to use, gmail.com. I want to use my username as also as my email address. I'll just say test user. Then I will create this user. So if I create the user, I can create credentials. So the way we are doing this manually, we need to do it with our SDK, Java SDK. On our SDK, we are going to create a user object and a credential object and create a user into our Keycloak. So for the password, you can see here, for the password, I can just say test 81234. Test 81234. Temporary, I will just say no, and I will save this. And I'll save this as a password. I'll say no thanks. So this user is now able to log in. So before we go to our SDK, let's test everything if it's working fine. Let's go to Postman and try to log in to our room, which is a Spring, with this user, test at gmail.com. So let me open my Postman. So in our Postman, what you need to do is, like, when you are connecting to our room, we are using localhost 8082. As you can see here, this is our Keycloak URL. So you say localhost 9082, and here you need to specify the path room, and our room name is Spring, and we are using these ones are the required path for a Keycloak. So you just need to know that this is the path when you want to log in a user on Keycloak. And we need to add a client ID, and make sure on your body the method is post, and in your body it's XW form URL encoded. That's the one required for Auth 2 authentication. And you need a client ID, a grant type, username and password. The username is the one that we created, test at gmail.com, and the password that I created. And the grant type, it's a password. There are multiple grant types like auth code, the client credentials, password. So we are using this one, which is password. It means you are providing username and password. And the client ID, here it's Spring Up. But this one, I haven't created it. So what you need to do, if I try to log in, it's saying invalid client, means this client is not yet there. So let's go and create that client. To create a client, we come to this client and we just say create client, and this is going to be my client. And I'll just say next, and I'll just save. So let's try to log in again with this client. You can see we get a bearer token, and let's try to decode this bearer token. If you go to jwt.io, that's where you can decode your token if you want to see what is in there. Then I can do this. You can see this is the user, and the email is verified, is set to true, and this is the name test user, and this is my username, and these are the details that are required when you are logging in. And this is our issuer. Our issuer, it's going to be this one. So this is the one that we use to validate the token. So our Keycloak is acting as an authorization server, whereby every microservice that we are going to have in Spring or Quarkus can connect to that authorization server. So the authorization server is responsible for identifying if created that token, and it will validate the token, is it expired or not. So if it's expired, you need to generate a new token by login again or by using refresh token. So the authorization server will validate each and token or a request that is getting into your application. So right now we have Keycloak running correctly. So what we need to do, let's go to our Spring.io and create a project and add a Java SDK into our Spring project and create a user to Keycloak using our own implementation, because here we're using the UI to create a user, but now we want to use the SDK. So let's go to our Spring.io. Start Spring. So let's go to this initializer. For me, I'm a big fan of Maven, so I will choose Maven, and I'm a big fan of Java. I'm going to create this using Java. and we have now a latest Spring Boot version, which is 3.3.1, so it's okay. And our group ID is code with BISC. And for demo, I will just say this one, I can call it our Auth service. Let me just say Keycloak Auth service, and this is Auth integration with Keycloak. And here I will just say code with BISC, and the package name is going to be Keycloak. So right now I will prefer Java 21. Let's go to 21. I'm now a modern guy. Why Java 17? Where we have better Java, which is Java 21 with the virtual threads, increased performance, and also the GraphVM. So let's go there. So I think here we are okay. Which dependence do we have to add here? The first one that come into my mind, it's Lombok. Or now we also have records. Should I add Lombok? No. Let's leave Lombok here. So what else? It's Spring Web. What are the dependencies? We need Spring Security, because we want to authenticate our APIs. So our APIs must be authenticated. So we can here add Spring Security. Do you have authorization server? Let's say authorization server, or Auth 2 authorization server. Let's add it also. So we have Spring Web, we have Spring Security, we have our authorization server. This one is we are going to use this one to notify our application that we are using Keycloak as an authorization server. By using these dependencies, we are okay. So let's generate this application and open it with our favorite IDE, which is IntelliJ. Some of you can use a VS Code. So I have downloaded it. Let me open this one. I can open it as a project. Let me open the project that we downloaded. So now I think it's downloading the dependencies. Let's wait for it to complete downloading the dependencies. So I think everything is now working fine here. Let's see. We have the source, we have the main, and we have our resources. I think this is just and we have, oh yes, we are okay. This one I want to change it. Let me refactor this, and I prefer application YAML. Yeah, and here we are okay. So what we need to do, we need to add a dependency which is for our Keycloak admin client. So before I do anything, let me just try to run the application. So our application is started at 8080. So mostly what I do for the configurations, I'll just say application name, application name. I'll just say Keycloak Auth service. Yeah, this is my application name. And what I do next is to change the port. I don't love 8080. I prefer my other ports, so I just say 6700, and I prefer to change the context path also, and I'll just say auth. So all my requests, we are going to have auth, because this microservice is for authentication, so I prefer to have the context path auth. So what we need to do, let's go to our, here we are done for the Spring IO. Let's leave it like that. For the Maven, I want to look for this Maven version Keycloak admin client. Let's look for the Keycloak admin client, this version, and we can use, since I'm using version 25.00, usually it's good to use the same version as your Keycloak version. So I will copy this dependence and I'll add it into my POM XML. So here I will just need to change this to Keycloak version. So I will just come here into my properties. Here I will just duplicate and I'll just say Keycloak version, and I'll come back here and I'll put that version, Keycloak version. Let's import this version. So what we need to do, we need to configure the Keycloak. So we need to configure this Keycloak. So what you can do, let's create a package called config. We need to tell it the server, which is our authorization server, our URL, the room that we are going to use. So let's go there and let's create a new Java class called Keycloak config, and we can make it at configuration, and I'll create a bin public, and I'll say Keycloak, this one, which is for admin client, because we want to interact with the admin client. Then I will just say return Keycloak builder, this one, dot builder, and it will return our builder. And make sure here we just add at bin. We are now configuring our Keycloak so that we know, it will know that this is going to be our, we need to configure that this is our authorization server. We want to interact with this room, we want to interact to this URL. So what we can do now, we can just say, let's see what we have in this builder. We can have a client secret, right? For now, let's just put this. Let's just put empty dot client ID. Let's leave it empty. In the grant type that we are going to use. And here I will just say, I told you about grant type. For this one, we want to use credentials. And the room, we already know our room is Spring. So we will add this into our YAML file, and we need our server URL, which is localhost at 9082. So let's add these configurations into our YAML file. I will just say app Keycloak then I'll just say admin client ID. So far it's empty. Client secret. So far it's empty. We are going to configure this, right? And for this, we want our room, which is going to be Spring, and our Keycloak server URL, and it's going to be HTTP localhost. Sorry, here I have to put this / it's 9082. So let's add this into our configurations so that we don't hard code things. I don't like to hard code things here. So I'll just say add value. app dot so let's look app.keycloak. We have admin, we have client ID. So here private string client ID like this. So let's configure also for the client secret in our application YAML. This is our client secret. Let's duplicate this. We need a room. Which is our Spring. And we need our server URL, which is server URL. So let's go if to see everything is okay. Server URL, room. So app Keycloak admin, we are fine. So here for the credentials, here it's client credentials. That's the one being supported, and password. Sorry for that. Yeah, you can see everything is fine. Our configuration is working okay. So we have configured our configuration. So to interact with our server, everything, we are going to use these configurations which we are using for this API. So we need to create this client. So we want to use the admin client. So let's go to our Keycloak and get the secret of admin client. So if you go to clients, we have this admin client. So we want to use this one as our admin client. So let's go to our secret here. The client ID here, it's going to be this one. But if we configure this, we don't have, you can see, we don't have the secrets, like the client secret, like the password of this. So we need to enable authentication here, enhancing security, and add service accounts roles. So these accounts roles are responsible for managing, creating users roles to the Keycloak. So after doing this, we can now go to credentials. We now have the client secret. The client ID is this one, and the secret is this one, which is visible here, and I can copy it and I can paste it here. So we are fine. We have configured our Keycloak and everything is now okay. So let's now dive into creating a user. How do we create a user with this SDK? So to create a user with this SDK, we need to create a new package. Let's create a new package here. This one, I can call it service, right? From this service, I can create a new interface. I can say this one is going for the user registration, deletion. So I can call it user service, and I make it as an interface. So let's create a method, and when we create a user, we just want to return, let's say, a void, and we just say create user. Then we need to send the details like the username, the password. The username is going to be email, so we just say username, and also first name and last name. So we need to create a package called let's just say model. In this model, I'll create a new record, which is called, I can call it new user. I can just say new user record, it's fine with me. And I'll just say string username. String password, string first name, string last name. Some people want to have an email different from username, but for me, I prefer a username to be my email address. So this is the request that I'm going to send here. I'll just do this and I'll import this class. This is an interface. We are okay. So what I can do here, let's just create the implementation. I'll just create a new package called imp. It's okay. And I'll do Java class imp here, whereby I implement and let me implement this method that we created. And here I'll just say add service. I need private final, and I need this config that we created, which is a Keycloak, this one. So this is the one that you are going to use to create to manipulate our request, to send requests to our Keycloak server. So that's why we created that config. And I can just generate a constructor. So yeah, that's why I said I was supposed to add a Lombok, but let me try to add that dependency so that I can't do this. Sometimes this is a boilerplate code, but with Lombok, it makes our life easier and it makes our code much cleaner. So let's go to our POM XML and I'll add a dependency here. So in my plugin, I have to add this, which is the Lombok, and I need to add that dependency also. Let's add the dependency here on top, which is this one. Yeah, it's already there in our Spring, so we are okay. After adding this Lombok, let's go back to our implementation. I want to remove this, and I'll just say add required Axe constructor like this, and I need it SL for logging. So sometimes we need that Lombok, but for my request, I'm going to use Java records since Java 17. So thanks for that, for Java 17. Yeah. So we want to create a user. So before we create a user, what we need to do here, we have in our SDK, there's what they call user representation. So this is the class that we use to set the username, the email, and that user representation. If you go to our users, this is the user representation. All of these are part of user representation, but for the user representation, it has these details. As you can see here, username, email, first name, and last name. So let's create user representation. We need it from what? From Keycloak. Goes to new user representation. I don't know if they have a builder for this. Let's see if they have a builder. They don't. It does not have a builder. So let's use this user representation, and I'll just set enabled to true. By default, the account is enabled. I can set the first name. It's coming from this, which is the first name. That's why we added first name and last name. set last name, and from our record, do we have last name? We have it. Do you have a username? Yes, we have it. Our email is our username, and our here for email we use our username as email. So these are the configurations that we can have on our user for email verified. So what we can do, let's say for user representation dot email, set email verified. By default, the email verification is not yet there, so I'll just say email verification to false, and we shall verify that email, and I'll show you how to verify this email. But we added this. It means we have now our user, which is similar to this one. Email verified here, it was true, I ticked that one, and this user is enabled, and you can see here we have set these properties, but we haven't set the credential, how this person is going to log in. So here I think we have credential representation equals to new credential representation like this. And for credential representation, we have to set the value. Set the value. The value is from new user record dot password, and we need to specify this, the type of this, set type of this, and the type is password. Let's see if you have this one, credential is password. Then from this user, so we have set, if you go to this credentials, you can see the type is password. That's why we set the password, and the value, this is the data that is being here. It's going to be the value, which is the password that your user is going to use to log in. But now we need to, we need to set the credentials of this user. Dot set credentials, and it requires a list. So we just say list of these client credentials. So by doing this, we have set our user and our password. So now how do we save this user to our Keycloak? How do we send this request to our Keycloak? That's why we have this configuration. So from this configuration, we want to create a user resource. So let's make it clear here. Private, I will say from the Keycloak we have user. I think it's user resource. This one, user resource. And I'll just say get user resource, because I will use this method multiple times. So let me create a separate method for this. So I will just say Keycloak dot room. So we need a room that we want to save this user. So we need just to say private string room, and here we can take this room from add value like what we did before, and we just say dollar this one app dot Keycloak dot room, and our room is going to be Spring based on our configurations here. Then we come here, we put our room here like this, and then we just say users. By doing this, we have returned our user. So here it's going to be users resources, not user resource. We need this users resources. So from this, we have our user resources. This user resources is saying that it's just sending to the user's API and create a user. So if you go to user, we have the create here, which is the method to create a user. you see, and it requires a user representation. That's why we did that. So if I come here now, I'll just say get, here I'll just say Shift F6 because it's users, get users resource dot var. Now I have the users resource. From this user resource, I want to create a user, which is our user representation, and it will return a response. After a successful creation of a user, we just say if objects from Java 8, you know, we have this objects equals to 201, means if it's 201 based on the response code here, status code. We have this status code. It means a user has been created. Then we just say, now it's now simple. What we can do is we just say, let's log that. Just log .info new user has been created. But let's try to see which response code are we going to have here before we create a user. After we create a user, I would just want to see if, because we are going to have an error of forbidden. So we want to see this status so that I'll show you how to fix that. Status code response dot get status. This one, there's an issue of try catch. There's an exception that can be thrown, but let's leave it like this for now. So what you can do, let's create an API for this, and we can test with Postman. So let's go to our API. Let's create a new package called API. And I'll call this one API, and I'll create a new Java class, and I can call it users API, and it's going to be address controller and request mapping, and this one I can call this one users. Let's make this public, and I will just want to return a response entity. Let me just say, let me do this. I don't know which object I'm going to return. I'll just say create user, and here at post mapping, it request body, which is a new user, record this one. So if everything went well, I will just say response entity dot status. I will just say created http status dot created dot build. I don't want to return anything here. It required Axe constructor from Lombok. I want to add private final. I will say user service. I will just use the interface which we implemented in the implementation package, and from this I will just say user service dot create user new user record. So by this, it means our user can be created, but we didn't specify our method that it's a post mapping. So we are going to create this user by calling this API, and we can create a user. But if we try to reach this endpoint, remember we added security. So let's test our application to see if it's working fine. Let me enable these annotations. Everything will be working fine here. So let's go to our Postman, and we want to call this endpoint, and you can see it's running on port 6700. So let me copy this and I go to our Postman localhost 6700, and I told you the context part is auth, and our user URL it's users because we want to access the users, and our post and our it's going to be JSON. Okay, and we need to add this. We are going to have a username, and my username will be bisc@gmail.com. So let me do this, and here my password for test, I usually use test 81234. And for the first name, it's bisc. And last name, it's dot. So this is our request body that we want to send to our API. So let's try to send to our API this one. We are getting 401. Why are we getting 401 here? Because we added security. We added the security dependency in our POM XML. We have Spring security, so we will not be able to access our API. So what we can do, we need to whitelist this security for this specific endpoint, because when creating a user, it means the user is not yet authenticated. So we need to create by allowing filtering of certificates. So here in our config, we need a new Java class where we can say web security config, and it's going to be at configurations, and we need to add this code to allow that API. So we need to add this bin, which is web security customizer, and we want to allow the users on the post, but on the post we want to allow that user to be able to create. But when the API starts with public, it means we are allowing everything to get into our application without security, because the API starts with public. And here we are enabling for Swagger. We shall add Swagger in the future so that our API can be accessed through the Swagger. So we need to allow Swagger to open without any issue with this security. So let's try to rerun the application. So let's test our endpoint again to create a user. Here we have 201 created. Let's see, are we sure this user has been created? No. The problem is that here the status code is 403. When we are trying to create this user, we don't have permission. This admin client user that we are using is authenticated because it's not 401. It's authenticated but does not have permissions to create a user. So here, if it's not 201, right, what you can do, if it's not 201, we need to throw an exception. We need to throw an exception through, I'll just say runtime exception. And I'll just say status code response code dot status. It means in our application we are not, the user has not been created, so we can throw this exception. We can find a way to handle this exception better, but here I'm just focusing on show you how to work on this. So this error is 401, but it's because we did not handle that exception with global exceptions. So it's okay, we will fix that later, but you can see status code is 403. So the user has not been created. So how do we add that permission? Which permission do we need for us to be able to create that user? So let's go to our Keycloak and let's go to the clients and admin client. To create a user, we need a permission. This type of permission, we can say manage users. Let's assign this from our service account roles. So let's now test to create a user, which is bisky@gmail.com. Let's first check if that user, do we have that user? We don't have, we only have test which we created manually. So let's test this user. We have 201. It means this user has been created. So let's refresh here and see if the user has been created. Sure, the user has been created with bisky@gmail.com, and you can see the email is not verified because we have set this user to say email verified is equal to what? Is equal to false. That's why we have this red arrow showing this user has to verify this email. But let's check other details. Yes, the name is Bisky, the last name is Dot, is the same as we sent from our Postman. And if we come back here, you can see, if we come back to our Keycloak, let's see the credentials. This is the credentials. And let's test that user to log in with our Postman, which is Bisky, and the password is test81234. We already have the API, so let me change here, which is our new user. Let's try to log in with the password that we created. You can see the user is able to log in, and if we take this token to see it in our in our jwt.io, let me clear this and paste this one. You can see this is the user who has logged in, which is Bisky Dot. Now we are able to create a user with Keycloak admin client. How easy is it to do that with the Spring and Keycloak integration? It makes our life easier for developers to develop a authentication and authorization server within few hours. And with this time, we are now able to authenticate our APIs. So before we go to authorization, like authorization server, there are some things that I want to show you, like how do we verify this user email? Because if you go to Keycloak, this credentials is not yet verified. We need to send a verification email to this user. So that is what we want to do next. So to send a verification email, it's easier with this. So what we can do, let's go to our let's go here into our, let's go to this interface. Let's say send verification email. Then here we need to send, this is going to be our user ID. So we need to send a verification email. So let's implement this. It's easier. Let's do this. Send a verification email. I told you we need this method always, get resources. That's why I created it separately so that it's going to be easier. So if we want to access our users, so into our users, we want to fetch the user, get the user with this user ID, and I will call send verification email. By doing this, we are able to send a verification email for this user. So let's create an API, which is a, let's say, user. So in our API, let's do this. And this one, it's going to be users send verification email. And I'll just say send verification email. And I'll just say a put mapping. And here I'll just say, here I'll just say add this user of this ID, and here I'll just say add path variable, and I will remove this. Sorry for that. String user ID. Here it's an ID, just say ID so that it matches this, and I'll just say send verification email, and I'll pass an ID, and here I'll just say okay. So to send a verification email, let's reload this, and it's going to be a put mapping. So everything is working fine, but let's go to this API, and I want to duplicate it. After duplicating it, I told you I change it to put mapping, and here we need a user ID, and let's get this user ID for this user which is not yet verified. This is our user ID, and let's put it here, and let's take the path that is send verification email, this one, and I'll put that path here. I'll put that path here. I think we are going to have issue with security again because of this. So we need to whitelist this API for send verification email. So how do we do that? So what we need to do is to add this, because it's a put mapping. So the method it's put, and for our users, we have this path variable it's going to change, which is ID, and send verification email. Then we need to restart this. So after restarting our application, let's try to send a verification email to that user. So let's see if we have an exception. Yes, we have an exception. And the problem with this exception, is because we didn't configure the email engine that we can use to send this verification email. Let's now configure our email to our Keycloak. To configure our email to our Keycloak, we need to come to room settings. In this Spring room, we go to the email, and from this email, we enter the details of email. So if you have like SMTP, you can create the one if you don't have it, or you can just use your Gmail. You can look how Gmail SMTP works, and you can use your Gmail configuration. For me, I have an existing SMTP which is hosted by Zoho that I can use to configure this. So let me use those details. From email is from this one, and I'll just say no reply to no. And the host, I'm going to use this one, which is EU. And for the port, it's 587. That is the one used for Zoho. So here, I forgot I'm supposed to add an email that I can use for my admin. No reply. Here, let's configure our host. I'm using this host. For Gmail, you can look for the Gmail host. And I can use this one. Enable start TLS. And for the authentication, I'm going to use this one. So let's test our connection here. An email has been sent here, and I'll receive the email. As you can see, this is the test email which came from no reply at code with BISC. So it means our email integration is working fine. So let's go back to our API and test again to send an email. And right now we get an OK. So let's check, do you have any exception? This was the previous exception that we got. Let's see if that user will get an email. But the problem is that we don't have access to this user that I created. It's just an email, that's a random email. Let's create a new user and test a proper email verification. So here I'll just say codewithbisc@gmail.com. Codewithbisc@gmail.com, and I'll create a user. A new user has been created. Let's go to Keycloak and get the credentials, this user ID. Let's go to our API of sending verification email. I'll paste this and I'll send an email and wait it to receive to my Gmail. Let's wait to receive it to my Gmail. I have received this email to my Gmail. Let's open it. You can see this is a link which came from our Spring to verify my account. As you can see, this account is not yet verified. Here it's false, and here you can see this red. So let me verify it and try to refresh. I will click the link and I will confirm this one, and the account has been updated. Let me come back to my UI and I want to refresh here. If I refresh, you can see the account, the account of Code with BISC has been verified, and the email verification, it's working fine. So let's do a change here. What should we do first? Let's say after creating of a user here, that's when this is the first time we want to send a verification email also after just creating a user. So what we can do, we can use this resource and we can try to search this user by username, and it's coming from this new user record dot username, and here we just say it's equal to true. And this one, if you search, it will return a list of users representation, but we know this user has been created and a username is always unique. So what I can do, it means I can get the first record, which is this one. Then after getting this user record, I will then send a verification email to this. Send verification email, and this one is a user representation one.getID. After doing this, an email will be sent. So this is what you are supposed to do. After creating a user, send a verification email, and the user will get a verification email to complete the account registration. So by doing that, I will just reload this and I will come here. From here, I want to delete this email. I want also to delete this user so that we can get a new email. I will delete this user and I can do this. So let me create the same user again and receive an email to see if our function is working fine. Yeah, after doing this, we will receive an email for that user. This is the email that I just received right now. And I will verify. If I come here, you see last time we deleted this user and we can see it's not yet verified again, and I will verify it right now. And the email has been updated, and if I come here and refresh, the same user is now able to use the application with the verified email address. Now we are okay. What about deleting a user? You see me clicking this delete button by clicking delete user. How do we implement this with our SDK? Let's come to our application. This was just send verification email. Let's do the same like delete user. I will just say delete user. You want to delete a user? Let's implement this. It's now simple. I think now you have the flow of this. So by doing that, we just say do this. User resources dot delete, and we pass the user ID, and the user will be deleted after this. So let me go to this API. I want to add a delete mapping. Here it's going to be a delete mapping because we are deleting a user. And here we pass a user ID and we just say delete user. Here it's going to be delete user. And we pass a user ID, and here we just say no content. So by doing this, a user has been deleted. Let's test our API, how to delete a user. But remember, this API is not, because of security reason, we need to configure this, because when you're trying to delete, we are going to have issue with our security. So what I can do, let me just copy this put, and I want to have a duplicate of this tab, and here I'll change this to delete, and always the body is going to be none. I'll just say none here, and because it's a delete mapping, it's a delete user, I want to delete this user that we just created code with BISC. But if I do this, we are going to have 401 issue for this. So it's because our API is not yet whitelisted. So we need to go to our configurations, which is web security. We have this delete. What you can do as usual, just do this duplicate. Here it's going to be users, and here we want to delete everything with this ID. So this is how we can allow that endpoint to be accessed publicly. So I will just do this and I will run the application because it's a delete method. So let's test our API again. This is the user that we want to delete. Because I used a wrong ID, I will just paste this ID and I'll send this one. Yeah, the user has been deleted. I didn't restart the application. Let's come here and refresh. You can see the user has been deleted. So it means our API for deleting, it's working fine. So the next thing is, what happens if a person forgets the password? How are we going to achieve this? A user has forgot the password. We want the user to update the password. So let's dive into that. We need to go to this method, and here we need to implement forgot password, and here it's going to be our username. Remember, our username is our email. So to achieve this, let's implement that method. So what we can do, we want to find this user first, like what we did here. We want to find this user by email. Then once we get that user, we can now start implementing forgot password. So we need the user ID maybe. So here it's get user resource. And here the username, it's coming from So now we have found the user that we want to initiate an action for forgot password. So then the user is supposed to receive an email to update their new password. So after doing this, let's do this here. Now dot get user ID, user representation 1 dot get ID. Then we can get this resource user. From this resource user, we need to execute action of emails, right? So what we need to do, we have several execution. So if you go to here, let's go to this user. You can see if you go to user, we have several. These are the email that we can send, and the one that we want is update password. So we want to send this action to the user, then the user receive an email. That's why we use execute action email. So we just say list as usual of, I'll just say update password. By doing this, we can send this update password email to this user, which is a email address here. So let me do this, and I will just come here, and where this method is being called in our API, we want a put mapping here, put mapping. And we want let's do this. Okay, the URL, I can say forgot password. The method, we can say forgot. And here it's going to be at request param, and we want to send an username. Then we just say forgot password, and with our username, don't return anything. So this endpoint won't work again because of security. So let's configure this into it's a put mapping again. So let's do this. Let's put a comma here, and it's under users, and the URL is this one, which is forgot password. It's a put mapping. So let's test our endpoint and to see if we are going to receive that. So I will just duplicate this, and it's a put mapping. And in my URL, it's users forgot password. And in my body, I can just say, okay, I will just do this. Username equals to. So I want to create code with bisc@gmail.com. So we need to send a valid email address. So what I can do now, let me just create this user, because I already deleted this user when I was showing you how to delete a user. So I will create this user. I don't want to waste much of the time. Let me go to the users and I'll just, this is the email, and I will verify my account by clicking this. The email has been verified. If I go to Keycloak and refresh, the email has been verified, and I will go to this method, which is forgot password that we just created with the users forgot password, and I'll send this one and I'll click send. 204 no content. Let's wait for the email for that, which is update password, which is the one for update your account. So I have received it. If I click this email, I'll click proceed and I'll enter my new password, but I will just keep as it is test 81234 and test 81234, and I'll just click submit, and my password has been submitted. So this is how you can implement forgot password. So we are done with forgot password. So how do we assign a role to a user? That's the next step. How can we assign a role to a user? To assign a role to a user, it's simple. Here you can see we have this service, which is user service. We need the other service, which is a role. So let's go to our Keycloak. Let's just create a role, and I can go to room roles, and I'll create a role called, let's say, admin. I'll just say app admin. This is the role, right? And I can create another role, which is a member, like member app member role. So let's say we have these roles and we want to assign this. The easier way to assign a role, let me just do this to this test user, and I just go to role mappings and I just assign these roles, and these roles are under this room, and I'll just click them like this and assign them. So how do we implement these roles of a user how do we implement them with our SDK? Let's deep dive into that. So we need to create a new service. Let me just copy this one and I'll call this one role. Role service. And here I'll just need a endpoint, just say assign role. And it requires string user ID and string the role name as it is when we created like member or admin. Then after doing this, let's create an implementation here, new Java class. Implementation, they say implements, and here I say it required Axe constructor its service at SL. So there are things that we now need. We need to find the user. If I get the user, I'll just go into and I will set the role which we get here. So what we need to do, let me go to this user service implementation. We already have this, and here it was public. So it was private. Let's make this public, and no, let me leave this one like this. I need to find, let me create a method here just that we're going to return a user. that is going to return a user resource. So what I can do, I'll just say user. Here I'll just say get user. Then here I'll pass a user ID and I implement this method. We already did that before when we get a user, which is this one. So I just want to do the same, and here I will just do this. And I will get this from here, and I will get this from here. I'll just say user ID. Here it's supposed to be user resource. Like this. Sorry for that. I thought I imported the right thing. So the reason of doing this is because I want to call this method in my implementation. So I'll just say private final user service. When assigning, I need to find this user resource. Get user resource, this one, and I put my user ID. So the purpose of this user resource, this user that we currently have, it's because we want to set the pass, we want to set the rows for this. So there's the method called rows, this one, and it's going to be a room level, and we want to add this one. So here we just say collection like this, single list, and then we can pass this one. So here it requires, if you go here, it requires a list of row representation. So we need to find this row. So to find this row, like what I told you before, we just come here and we need our, let's go to our implementation here, like what we did here. We need this and come to our row here, and we need to paste this, and we need the resource for rows. So we just say private rows resource, this one, get rows resource, and then we just say return, like usual, keycloak dot room, which is our room dot rows. So we need now to find this row from our keycloak, which is being passed here. So what we need to do here is just, let me do this. We have this resource and we need to get that row. So to get that row, we just say get that row name like this, dot to representation. Here to representation, this one, then we want to return this. This is the representation, means we find the row and we assign this row to this user. That's why we did that. So what we are doing, it's simple. We are searching for this member and we get the row representation. That row representation, we are assigning it to this user, because this user is going to have list of what? List of rows. You can see this user is going to have a list of rows. So we can assign that rows to this user. So what we can do, we are now able to assign a row. So we need an API for rows. So we just do this, and let's paste this, and we can say rows API. And here it's going to be rows service, row service. Remember, it's a put mapping because we are updating here. It's going to be a rows. From this row, we just say assign to users. And we know the user ID, which is going to be user ID. It's going to be a user ID, and a request parameter, which is going to be string row name. By doing this, here, let's refactor this to row service. Then we can assign a row, a user ID, which is this one, and a row name. After doing this, once this is done, I'll just say no content. We are not returning anything from this. By doing this, we are able to assign a row. But let's test how we can do this. But right now, when you are assigning a row, it means the user must be authenticated. But our application needs to know who created the token. So let's test our API. While the application is starting, let me duplicate this, which is the one that you want to use. And here it's going to be rows. And if I come back here, I want to copy this assign. I want to copy everything from here. And we need a bearer token for us to be able to access this endpoint. And if I come to our login, this one, I will just say code with BISC at gmail.com, and I will get the bearer token. And I'll come here, and in my authorization, I will choose bearer token, and I will paste the bearer token here. Here I need a user ID because I want to assign this row to a certain user. And let me go to this user, which is code with BISC. I will copy the user ID, and I will come back to my Postman, and I'll paste this. And in my query parameter, it's row name. Let's go to our logic. It's a row name. I want to assign a row code member. This is going to be our row. But I added bearer token. Let me try to access this endpoint. We are still getting 401, but we are authenticated. Why we are getting 401? Because we didn't tell our service the authorization server. So we need to configure here our authorization server, where it's going to fetch this token, where it's going to validate this bearer token, so that the user will be able to access the APIs well authenticated. So let's add the configuration for this. So we need to tell the application that this is our authorization server, means our Keycloak, and we added our server URL, which is HTTPS 9082, and we added the rooms, and our room it's Spring. So when the request gets in, it will be sent to our Keycloak authorization server, and the authorization server will validate this bearer token. If the bearer token is valid, then we are going to get 200, 201, every response code which is not 401. It means we are authenticated, and we have that the Keycloak has authorized us to access that endpoint. So the other thing that we need to do, we need to go to our web security config. Let's just add enable security. We are enabling web security to our applications. So let's test our API again. So after doing this, let's go to our API and send a request again. Now we are getting 500. Let's see what's really the issue of this. It means we were authorized to access this thing after we added authorization server. We are now getting 403 because we don't have permissions to assign roles. Our user does not have that permission. I already showed you how to add a role when creating a user. So let's now add that permission to this user. Now we are in our implementation. You can see we get 403 here. It's no longer 401. We are now within the application. Let's go to the Keycloak and add that role. So if we go to clients here, we need to go to our admin client that we are using. We need to go to our service accounts roles, and we need to assign a role which is an admin. So let's search for an admin for now. Let's add this room admin, and I will click this and I will assign to this. I've assigned all the permission to this admin because I want this user to have the control of everything in the application, because this is an admin client. So he must be able to assign roles, to assign groups, to create everything. So let's test again, because this user code with BISC, if you go to the roles, he does not have that role member. Let's test again. Now we are getting unauthorized. It means our token might be expired. So let's test this by creating another token. And we want also to check if we don't have any exception after that. We don't have an exception, so it means this exception is for security of our token which is expired, maybe 5 minutes. So let's update our token and paste this one and send again. We are getting to 04. It means a row has been assigned to the user code with BISC. Let's check again into here, and I'll click this refresh button. We are now have this member row. This is how you can assign a row to a user. This is how easy it is with Keycloak to assign a row using this Java SDK admin client, and is to manage, and the exception are clear, as you can see using the SDK. The exception are well documented. So now we have managed to create a user, assign roles, update password, verify email address. We are almost covered everything that you need when you are creating a user. These are the common things that you do. We have assigned a role to a user. How do we delete a role from a user? Let's deep dive into that. So here it's an assign. Here it's delete role from user. And let's implement this. the same way that we did here is the same way that we want to do that. So let's copy this code, and we want to change one line of code from here. Here we are adding, here we are just remove. That's what we are supposed to do. From here we assign a row, and here it's going to be a delete mapping. Row remove for this user, and assign row. Then we just say delete row from user or unassign. It's the same way. This is the endpoint that we need to call, and we are just put where we are saying assign, just put remove, and it's a delete mapping. So let's test that. So if we go to our Postman, we can duplicate this. And here we say assign, then we just say remove rows remove from this user. And if we go to into this user, which is code with this, let me refresh this. We have this member, and let's try to log in first and get the token, so that we don't get 401 when we are trying to delete that row from a user. And we can come back to our, here it's a remove, and we can go to authorization, and we can delete our token. Don't forget to change our method to delete, and I will send a request, and we are expecting to get a 204. So let's check if we still have this row. I will refresh. The row has been deleted. So how do we get list of rows of a user? So the rows that are assigned to this user, how do we get all of them? Let's create another API here, and I just want to say rows for the user. So I will just do, if I go to let's go do it into the user service, and I will just want to do this, and I will get the list of get user rows, and I will just get for the pass user ID, and here it's a list of, they call them row, I think row representation. We can change this later if the return type is not the correct one. So let's do this, and I will implement this method. So we get our user, which is this user, which is, I'll pass the user ID, and I'll get the rows, and I'll get, say, room level, and I'll say list all. And this is the rows that I want to get from this. I think we are okay. So the list all is returning the list. So we need to, where we are in our forgot password, let's just create another method, which is called this one, get user roles. Get user roles. And here we are passing a user ID. I will just say a user ID and / roles. And here it's going to be a path variable, remember, and it's an ID. From here we just say get users roles, and we can pass the ID of the user, and we can return, here it's going to be an OK.body, and we can remove this build. We can get the list of the rows of this user. So let's test this again and see if you are getting the right result. I'll run the application and I'll go to my Postman. I'll just duplicate this, and here it's going to be users, and I'll delete this. After a user ID, I'll just say I need rows, but I'm not sure if the token is still authenticated. The method is supposed to be get, and I can do this. Let's see our method correctly. It's rows, and yes, they change this to get mapping and rerun our application because you want to get results. And I'll send our request and I'll get this one row for this user. So this is the default row mapping Spring. If you go to our Keycloak, this is the only row this user has. So let's add that same row to that user, put mapping, and here I'm not sure if the token is expired. Let's try to log in again with another token. I'll copy this token and I will assign that one here, and I'll send this one, and let's do a get. We are supposed to see 2 rows, which is a member and this one default. So we have managed to add a row, to delete a row, to get users rows. But we have something that we need also to discuss with this. We have worked on the clients, rooms, users, room rows. Let's go to the groups. This is our next section. Let's look into the groups. So into the groups, we can create a group, and this one we can, let's say it's called developers. This is the name of your group. In this group, you can add rows. So in the row mappings, you can assign rows from here, or we can change here. We can say every group that, if you are in that group of developer, we can create, let's create a row called developer. Usually they do something like, let's say you are giving them rows, like you can create a row called, let's create a row called merge. This is the name of the row. So the developer are allowed to maybe to merge. So also the developers are allowed, let's create another row, maybe let's say the row is supposed to be develop, right? And we have these rows for the developer. So in our groups, we want to add those. So we can go to row mappings and we can assign this, and we can move here to developer, which is at the room level, develop and merge. Yeah. So right now, if you go to this user code with BISC is not yet in any group. He only have 2 these rows, but code with BISC user is a developer. We need to assign code with BISC to this group. So we want this user code with BISC to join that group. So here you see there's a join group, means we have list of groups here, which is developer. The same way you are seeing it here, that's the same way you implement that into our application. So let's go into the application and start to work on groups. So let's create the first one, which is, let's create an interface called group service. In the group service, we want to assign group, and we want to delete group. It's going to be easy. Here we don't say a name, we just say group ID. We work with the IDs of a group, right? Let's see if we are able to see the groups. If you go to groups, let's see if we are able to see the IDs of this group. You can see this is the group ID that is in here. I'm not seeing anywhere here. So let's come back here and create an implementation for this. And I will just create a new Java class. Implements group service, and we need to import this. As always, it required Axe constructor for our to add our for dependence injection. Add SL for our logging, and add service to be added into inversion of container. So what you need to do, let's implement this. Here we remember we need, as always, private final Keycloak, and we need the room. So what I can do, I also copy the user service, and I'll come here into our group implementation, and I'll do this. I'll paste this. So to assign a user, we have this one. What you can do to assign a user to a group is easy. Just say user. We are getting the resources, which is the user ID, right? Then you just do this, and we just say user dot join group, and we will pass the group ID. That's all. This is how you can do that. That's only thing that you can do. To remove user from the group, it's also simple. User dot, we just say group, and see how we can leave this user, leave from this. We just say user dot leave group, and we can pass the group ID. That's all. Let's now create the APIs for this. This is an updating as always. So we can copy this one, which is the copy. Here we just say groups, and here we want to assign user to a group. Just say assign user to a group. We have the user ID here. It's going to be a group ID. So here we just say groups. Here we just do this, and we can pass the group ID, and we can assign to this user, assign, and we are okay. And we need this one also to be a path variable. We have group ID and we have user ID, and we can say group service assign here user ID and the group ID. Unassign group. As usual, the API it's going to be the same, this one, but here it's going to be delete mapping, and here it's going to be a path variable, and we just say delete user from a group, and here it's going to be a group ID, and here user ID and group ID. This is how we can remove a user from a group. So let's change this to group service. Let's go to roles API. Here it's supposed to be assign role. Let's run our application and test it again. So we need to assign a user to a group. So we need a post mapping. Let's duplicate this post mapping. And here it was auth roles, and this one is auth groups. And we need to assign this user, and here we need an ID. We no longer using the raw name, so I showed you how to get an ID. This is the ID. If we select a group, we can copy this ID and we can come to our Postman. Just after here groups, we passed a group ID, then we assign it to this user, but our token is expired. So let me try to log in again and get a token. I will copy this and I will put in the authorization like this. I will paste this and I'll send my request here. I'll get 204. Let's see if the user is now in that group. So by going to members, we'll be able to see that Code with Bisq is now in this group. If I go to users, if I go to this Code with Bisq, you can see if I go to groups, it's now in the group called developers. So this is how you can assign to that group. And if you go into that group, it means that user, this user is now have roles, which is a merge and which is a develop. So to leave that group, it's just also the same. Let's duplicate this and put here the delete, and let me confirm our UI. Here it was assigned, and I will just say remove. Let's see in my roles. Here it was remove. Okay, that's okay. So I will copy this and let me run the application, and I come back here where I said groups assign. I will just say remove. After doing this, I will just send a request again. I will get 204 and I will check again if that same user is still in that group. I definitely know that we removed that user from that group, as you can see. And if you go to that group, you can see in the members, we don't have any member joined that group. So this is how we assign user to a group. This is how you can remove user to a group. As always, if you go to let's go to our user implementation. Here we added how to get user roles. So we need also to get user groups. So for that user, we want to get the users, get user groups. And here we just say groups, and it will return a group representation. Group representation. And it's easy. Just copy this and go to this where it was defined in our interface. I will just do this and this. That's all. And to make sure everything is fine, it override. It's okay. Where we are getting rows, let's just do this, and we get say user groups. Here we just say groups, and the name of our method is get user groups. So by doing this, you can get the users from these groups. So let's test our implementation. I will just assign a user to this group, assign it again. Let me do that. I think my token is not yet expired, and I want to get this one was for roles. I want to get this one for groups. I will create this one here where I just say groups, and let me just come here. I think this token is too active, or let me go to the login. I'll just get another bearer token, and I'll get the user in that group authorization. I'll just say bearer token, and I'll paste this bearer token, and I'll send the request. You can see this user is in this group. We have managed to get the groups of that user. So by doing this, we have managed to create a user up to assigning a user to a group, removing everything. So I think I have covered almost most of the concept that are on Keycloak, how to create a user, assigning roles, putting them into groups, and getting the user's roles. So now we need to add like RBAC, role-based access control. What happens if a user does not have that API, that role? So what we need to do, I will just create an API called test API. Test API, where we are going to manage, I will just say RBAC API. RBAC. So don't worry, everything, I don't want to return anything here. RBAC, I just want to test here. Let's delete what is in here. No content, it's okay. I don't want to do most of the stuff here. I will just say get making. So I want to access this endpoint. So here I'll just say test for merge row. Right now, if I try to code this, I'll just say merge. So this get mapping is for testing that it must be accessed by someone with a merge row. So if I test this one, RBAC get merge row. So let me go to Postman. I want to duplicate this. And Auth here, I'll just say RBAC. I'll just say merge row. So if I come here, let's go back to Postman. If I do this, I'm getting 204. It means I'm able to access this endpoint, even if I don't have that row. So let me go to this user. Code with BISC is in this group. Developer is, if I go to developer, you can see developer is the list of roles, which is a merge. But I want to go to members, and I want to unassign this. I want this member to leave this, or I go to users, code with BISC, groups, and I click this leave button. I'm no longer in that group. And if I send this request, I still have access to that endpoint, which is this one. So let me just say south something, or here I will just say body. I'll just say something like I have access. to merge row. Here it's supposed to be okay, sorry, because it's not printing anything. So if I send a request here, we are supposed to see something. I have access to this merge row. But the problem that we have is that this user, we want that endpoint to only accessed by someone with the row code merge. So how do we achieve this? If you come here in Spring, we have something called a pre-authorized. This one. In this pre-authorized, you can say yes, row code. This row can be merge. So this endpoint is supposed to be accessed by someone with this row. So if I reload this one and test again, we know that that user does not have that row. But let's see if this user still accesses that endpoint. Right now it's because the token is expired. So I can log in again and demonstrate our concept. Copy the token. Authorization. And I'll send. But you can see this user is still having 200 okay. But why is not working? Why this thing is not working? But we told it that use this. We told Spring that pre-authorized only for this merge. But that user does not have that row. By confirming that, we can go to these users and we go to the row mappings. That user does not have that row. It has these two rows. So let's try to fix that one. To fix that one, let's go to web security. When we enable web security, we just say enable method security. By enabling method security, it means we are now able to use it pre-authorized. So let's test again if we still access that endpoint. We are now getting 403 because we don't have that row. So it means our authorization is now working fine. So let's go back and add that row to that user. And I can go here, I can assign these rows, I can assign that merge and I'll assign it. And let's test our API once again. And I can send a request. We are still getting 403. Let's test why we are still getting 403. So let's go now into our web security config. In this web security config, we need to know how to retrieve these rows from the token. So if you go to Keycloak, if you go to our jwt.io, you can see we have access rooms, we have rows, we have merge, we have member. Because of different applications, this is not the standard way of adding rows to the bearer token. So you need to tell your security how to retrieve these rows from the JWT token. That's why we added this configuration. So here we are telling JWT, the security filter chain, how it's going to retrieve these rows from JWT token. So we have this JWT authentication converter, which is responsible for converting that to the standard that we want. So if you go to extract resource rows, we have this realm access. If you go to the token, we have realm access, we have rows, and we have resource access. We want to get all the rows which are in this realm access and also a resource access. That's why we see this implementation of realm access and resource access. Then we add them into to these rows. So here we are looking for the access for the resource access and from the realm access, and we add those rows here. After that, we can now filter by granting simple grant authority, whereby we are taking each row, put underscore row underscore something, and the Spring will be able to get those rows. After doing that, I added this auth converter, and I added that config into our web security configuration, and this is the auth converter where I added it to this new bin. This bin is responsible for security, and we can run the application and we'll be able to get a success result. So it was forbidden. Now let's get a token first from our login. Let's get a token first. And let's go to our get and authorization, and we can send post, and we are now having access to that. So if I remove that row from our Keycloak administration, if I remove that merge and assign this row, you can see if I send a request here, it's because this bearer token is still having that. So we need to log in for this to take effect, because it retrieved. So this bearer token does not have that. So let's copy this and go here, and in authorization, let's paste this and send a request. We are now seeing a 403 because that row has been removed. So this is how we can remove that row and how we can retrieve rows from the JWT token. And I showed you this is the RBAC process. So if what happens if you assign this user to a group, this user, let's assign him here, and I'll assign him here. And if you can see the bearer token that I just copied here. If I go to JWT, you can see this bearer token does not have a merge and does not have a developer. So let's try to log in again and see how the rows are being added from the group. So I can go to this authentication and I can send here. You can see the bearer token has increased its numbers, its characters. So if I paste here, because I added that user into a group, you can see we are now seeing the rows in that group. And with that token, if I come back here to this get which failed before, if I paste that, if I send request, you can see this user is that merge row, and that merge row is inside the group, and the group is assigned to a user. This is how you can achieve this. So thank you guys for watching this long tutorial. I hope you understand how authentication and authorization works. I covered all the concept that you can get started and enhance your security in your application development in an easy way, and how to do it with the Spring. And I'm using the latest Spring, which is 3.3.1 and JDK 21. Everything that you are seeing is up to date. How you can achieve this, how to secure your application, or how to make difficult for hackers to access your application through the use of authorization server, which is a Keycloak. So let's meet another next video tutorial. If you want to learn more about Google Sign-In, I have a separate tutorial for that. I don't have time to add all those concepts in this video. Let's meet in another next video tutorial. Salut coders.